In an age of empires, when entire continents were being carved up, one kingdom in the heart of Southeast Asia played a game of chess with the world's superpowers and, somehow, it won. This is the story of how they pulled it off.
Think about it. The late 19th century was the peak of the age of empire. European powers were just slicing up the globe. But right in the middle of it all, you have the Kingdom of Siam, what we now call Thailand, holding its ground. So how? How did this one kingdom manage to stay free when all of its neighbors fell?
Well, the answer really starts with this man, King Chulalongkorn, also known as Rama V. When he took the throne, he was just a teenager, inheriting a kingdom with a future that looked incredibly bleak. This is the story of the journey he set out on to keep his nation from being literally wiped off the map.
To really get the stakes here, you have to look at the map. From the west, you've got the British Empire, pushing in from Burma and India. And from the east, the French are advancing from Indochina. Siam was trapped right in the middle, a shrinking buffer zone whose independence was hanging by a thread.
So instead of just waiting for the world to come crashing down on him, the young king decided to go out and see the world for himself. Between 1870 and 1872, he went on these remarkable trips abroad, not for conquest, but for knowledge. You can think of them as incredibly high-stakes study tours to figure out the source of Western power.
So his first stops were the British colony of Singapore and the Dutch one in Java. And what he saw there, it was a complete revelation. He saw order, efficiency, modernity. He's studying their post offices, their telegraph systems, modern hospitals, advanced gasworks, organized shipyards. He was looking at the actual machinery of a modern state.
But his trip to India in 1872 was even more of an eye-opener. Okay, this wasn't just modernity. This was power on an imperial scale, the industrial might of British gun foundries, the military dominance of massive forts. He saw it all. He traveled for over 200 hours by railway and understood its power to move troops and supplies. And maybe the biggest lesson of all? He saw the memorials to the failed Indian Rebellion of 1857, and the takeaway was stark. A divided nation is a conquered nation.
And the king's own words here really show you how strategic he was. He realized that seeing the colonies just wasn't enough. Singapore, Java, India, these were just the results of Western power. He knew he needed to understand the cause. He had to go to Europe itself to see the source of all this power at its very heart.
So you have to understand, these journeys weren't tourism. They were intelligence gathering, plain and simple. And from everything he saw, the king came away with a crystal clear, two-part strategy for survival. He now had a blueprint, and he knew his kingdom had to change, and it had to change fast.
Just look at this contrast. On one side, you have traditional Siam, basically a patchwork of semi-independent regions, each with its own local lord. This made it weak, divided, and super easy for foreign powers to play one side against the other. On the other side, you have the king's new vision, a single, unified state, with all the power concentrated at the center, capable of rapid, nationwide modernization.
And this right here was the tool he chose to get it done, to drive these massive changes, to crush any resistance from those regional lords, and to present one strong, unified front to the West. He knew he had to centralize all authority in himself. He would forge an absolute monarchy, because he saw it as the only power strong enough to force reform from the top down.
But having a vision is one thing. Actually making it a reality is something else entirely. The king came home knowing he faced a long, incredibly difficult road ahead of him. He was about to try and fundamentally remake his entire country.
And this was not an overnight revolution, not even close. It was a deliberate, step-by-step process that took decades. Just 2 years after his trip to India, he sets up advisory councils. Then, in 1888, he standardizes education. And finally, the big one comes in 1892, a full 20 years after his travels began, with a massive reform of the entire government.
And here's what that reform actually looked like. The old system of nobles was basically swept away and replaced with a modern cabinet of 12 ministries, modeled directly on what he'd seen abroad. A ministry of the interior to control the provinces, a ministry of finance to control all the money, a ministry of public works to build railways. This wasn't just shuffling papers, this was building the new engine of a modern state designed for survival.
But this kind of radical, top-down change doesn't happen without a cost. For every piece of the old world that was being torn down, someone was there ready to fight for it.
I mean, think about it. You can't just take power away from regional lords who'd been running their own shows for generations and expect them to be happy. By 1902, that simmering resistance boiled over into open rebellion in both the North and the South, as local rulers fought back against losing their power. It was a pretty brutal reminder that the king's vision required not just persuasion, but also force.
Despite all that resistance, though, the reforms kept going. The country was being dragged, sometimes kicking and screaming, into the modern world. The legacy of this transformation, forged through observation, strategy, and sheer force of will, would end up defining the nation's entire future.
Which brings us to the ultimate question, right? After all the travel, all the planning, all the conflict, did it actually work?
And the answer is an emphatic yes. By modernizing its government, centralizing its power, and basically learning to speak the language of European diplomacy and administration, Siam accomplished what seemed impossible. It remained a sovereign nation, the only one in a region that had been completely swallowed up by colonial empires.
So, the king's reforms absolutely saved the nation, but they came at the cost of regional power and traditional ways of life. And it leaves us with a final really crucial question. What is the true price of modernization, and who is it that ultimately has to pay it?